Welcome to PC Hardware Therapy and to today's video where we will be upgrading the RAM of this PC from 16GB to a faster 32GB kit. Now some of you might remember this PC from when it was assembled. I'll put a link here as a card and also in the description. I did a video on that. After this build was done, there has been over time some upgrades done to it. The GPU was upgraded to a Radeon RX 6800 XT. And along with that, a much beefier PSU, an 850 watt unit from EVGA was upgraded. However, the main question of today is whether there is any benefit to upgrading to a faster 32GB kit in 2025 for a gaming system like this or not. For this, I have a 18 game benchmark lined up for you. But first things first, let's talk about the memory in this PC. This PC currently has the Patriot Viper Steel DDR4 3600 CL18 memory kit, 16GB, and I would be replacing it with the G.Skill TridentZ Neo 3600 CL16 memory. There is a difference between these two memory kits apart from the size. This kit is single rank, the old one, and the new one is dual rank, so that also gives some performance benefits to the PC. The other difference is the old one is CL18 and the new one is CL16. So there are two differences then which should benefit gaming performance. Let's do a little unboxing of this memory. Here's the memory kit, TridentZ Neo, a welcome card from G.Skill, a nice sticker. Usually you never find stickers for RAM, but this one is there. And here it is. Now let's get all these panels off. Here is the old kit. As a comparison, the size is quite similar. The first one is installed. Alright, the RAM is installed. Let's close up and boot the system. Let's find a monitor. Now let's power on the system and see if it is booting. I've also removed the front panel to have a better look on the RAM that has been installed. Let's do that now. Switching on the system. I see the lights on the motherboard light up. Now the power. Fans are spinning. We have lights on the RAM sticks. I don't know if that's visible in the camera. Maybe I'll try to move it to have a better look. Looking pretty. If you have a case where it has a glass panel, you can really show off these RAM sticks. The sticks have a little bit of RGB effect going on them, as you can see. Nice new shiny sticks. And we have a boot. Let's go into the BIOS and see if the XMP profile is loaded automatically. And let me turn the monitor so that it's clearer for you. Now as you can see, the RAM has been picked up correctly, 32GB running at 3600 MHz. That means the XMP profile has been loaded. In some cases it might not load automatically and then you have to go in here and load it manually. In some motherboards it's a different setting. Here it's DOCP standard. And let's go down into the DRAM timings to just confirm. And here we see the timings which are running right now. And I think with that we can boot into Windows and confirm whether all the details check out. In CPU-Z we can see a comparison of the memory timings. The new memory has 16 clocks as cache latency and the other timings are almost exactly the same, The cycle time of the new memory has 1 clock more at 85 as compared to the 84 of the previous kit. Extending the apples to apples comparison further, both memory sticks have chips from Hynix, and here we also see the difference in the ranks, single versus dual. You might also notice the memory on the left is branded as C17 series, but it never worked as CL17. Even after dialing in the settings manually, it always went back to CL18. Now here is an overview of the specifications of the PC. In total, 17 games have been benchmarked on 3 different settings, low, medium and ultra settings, stressing different components of the system. In low settings at 720p resolution, we will put all the load on the CPU and the GPU will be waiting for processing to finish on the CPU. By doing this, we can measure how fast the CPU can perform in a given game. Now in medium settings at 1080p, we are trying to create a balance where both GPU and CPU will be stressed. Now depending on the game, performance could still be either limited by the GPU or the CPU. Lastly, in ultra settings at 1440p, we are trying to create a GPU bottleneck where we will try to measure how fast the CPU can perform, including enabling ray tracing wherever available. This will showcase the situation when you have a low to medium end GPU that prevents higher performance in games while your CPU can still support even higher performance. By testing in these 3 settings, we can compare what is the performance difference, if any, between the 16 gigs versus the faster 32 gigs memory kit in all these scenarios. Now each benchmark setting is recorded 3 times. For the average FPS, we are going to take the median of the average FPS values of 3 runs. This means the value which sits in the middle of the 3 runs. For 1% low FPS, we will also take the median of all 3 runs, which means that the 1% low FPS value, which is in the middle of the 2 extreme values, will be taken as the result. Now with that out of the way, let's dive now into the benchmarks. First of the open world FPS games is Skull and Bones, a title released in 2024, and the game recommends 16 gigs of RAM for optimal performance. So let's see if it registered any gains by the upgrade of this memory. And yes, it did. In 720p low, we can see an 11% gain in the average FPS and a 17% improvement in 1% low FPS. In 1080p medium settings, the gains are slightly reduced to about 8% on the average and 6% in 1% low FPS. In 1440p ultra high settings pushes the graphic card to its limit and reduces any gains from the RAM, hence only a minor improvement in the 1% lows can be seen. Next up is Hogwarts Legacy, a game launched in 2023. Now this game expects 16 gigs of RAM as a minimum and 32 GB of RAM for ultra settings. So my expectations were high from this memory upgrade and the overall system RAM did go around 21 gig. However, as you can see in the benchmarks, there was not a huge gain in the average FPS. Having said that, the 1% lows did see an improvement going from 10% boost in 720p low settings to about 13% gain at 1080p medium settings and 10% improvement in 1440p ultra settings. Overall, good gains in 1% low FPS, adding to the smoothness of the game. In Cyberpunk 2077, 16 gigs memory is recommended, and in our test the game kept well below the limit. So let's see if the speed of the faster memory has any effect on the performance. Here we are benchmarking at 4 different settings. In 720p low settings with FSR set to performance, we get a boost of 6% in the average FPS and the same percentage in 1% low FPS. The trend continues in 1080p medium with FSR now set to balanced with 7% improvement in both the average and 1% low FPS. In 1440p ultra settings, the game starts to get a little bit GPU limited, so there is not much improvement in average FPS. However, the 1% low FPS, the game still picks up 6% improvement. Lastly, in 1440p RT medium settings, now this is with ray tracing, when the game is fully GPU bound, there is absolutely no difference in the performance between the 2 RAM kits. Red Dead Redemption 2 is a title released for the PC back in 2019, and the developer Rockstar Games recommended 12 gigs of memory, but the game regularly pushed the usage to 14 gigs. Let's see if there is any improvement due to the speed of memory, and yes, there is. In 720p low settings with FPS set to performance, we see a performance improvement of about 9% in average FPS and 10% in 1% low FPS. In 1080p medium settings with FSR set as balanced, we see 7% improvement in the average FPS and 9% improvement in 1% lows. In the GPU limited setting of 1440p with FSR set to quality, there is minimal difference in the performance as expected. GTA 5 is next, and the game needs no introduction. The game typically depends a lot on the CPU subsystem's performance than the GPU, so let's see if the RAM improvement makes any difference. In 720p we are totally CPU bound, and the game engine hits its artificial FPS limit of 188 FPS, so there is basically no difference in performance. In 1080p normal settings we start to see a big performance improvement in 1% lows, but I would take this result with a pinch of salt, as these 1% lows in this game are not very consistent. Average FPS also saw a slight improvement of 6%. In 1440p very high settings, we are slightly more GPU bound. We see slight improvements, but nothing to write home about. Kingdom Come Deliverance is next. Now this title was released in 2018, and even though it recommends 16 gigs of RAM, the game did push the total system usage above that limit at times. Looking at the performance in 720p low settings, we do see an improvement of about 6% in average FPS, but 1% low FPS saw a bigger gain of 9%. In both 1080p medium and 1440p ultra high settings, we see an improvement of 4 to 5% in average FPS and 7 to 9% in 1% low FPS, which means that the new kit offers an improved level of smoothness in the game. Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, a title released nearly a decade ago, recommends 8 gigs of memory. So if we see any improvement in this title, it will be due to the memory speed difference. So how does it do? Well, in 720p low settings, we see a big improvement of 14% in average FPS and 12% in 1% low FPS. The performance improvements continue in 1080p medium settings, where we see 13% improvement in the average FPS and 10% in the 1% low FPS. In 1440p ray tracing preset, the game becomes heavily GPU bound, and in this scenario there is almost no difference in the average FPS, but surprisingly 1% low FPS still saw a boost of 8%. Far Cry 6 is next, and this title was released back in 2023, recommends 16 GB of memory. At least while running the benchmarks, the RAM usage does keep below this 16 gigs limit. In terms of performance, there are minimal gains here. In average FPS, there are nil to 4% gains, and we can see a similar trend in 1% low FPS with only 3 to 5% gains registered. Overall, in this title, there is not much performance improvement by installing a bigger and a faster memory. Black Myth Wukong is a relatively new title in today's lineup. Launching in 2024, states 16 GB as its minimum as well as the recommended memory size. The game held itself very well within those limits. So did the new RAM kit elevate the performance of this game? Yes, it did, as long as you have a GPU power to support it. At 720p low preset with frame generation enabled and no ray tracing, we saw an improvement of 9% in the 1% low FPS and slight improvement to the already high average FPS of 250. As soon as the game became GPU dependent, as of 1080p medium preset, there was literally no difference in performance all the way up to 1440p high with ray tracing on. This shows that if you have a higher class GPU than what we are using today, there are slight gains to be had in 1% low FPS, adding to the overall smoothness of this game. Hitman 3 was a title released back in 2022. As seen with most of the games in today's lineup, recommends a memory size of 16 GB. Did the game push the RAM usage to more than that? Not really, at least not in the benchmarks. Not even at 1440p ultra settings with ray tracing on. So did it have any difference on the overall performance? Well, in 720p low settings, the average FPS boosted by a measly 4% and the 1% low FPS saw a slight improvement of 3%. As the game became more GPU bound, we still saw gains of around 3% in average FPS and surprisingly 8% in 1% low FPS. But those gains were short-lived when the game pressed hard on the GPU at 1440p ultra quality settings, actually resulting in a degraded performance by as much as 10% for 1% low FPS and 2% on the average FPS. Here it seems we see our first glimpse of an overhead running with dual rank memory kit. Up next is Shadow of the Tomb Raider, a title released back in 2018 with 16GB as the recommended memory. However, the game did not push beyond 12 gigs in the benchmarks. As you can see, the game responds positively to the new memory kit. At 720p low settings with FSR on, we see an improvement of 6% in the average FPS and 5% in the 1% low FPS. Moving to 1080p medium preset, it still maintained a similar improvement of 5% in average and 6% in 1% lows. At 1440p ultra preset, even with FSR on, the game became more GPU bound, and here the average FPS is pretty much the same with the slight boost to 1% low FPS. From here we move on to our first esports title, CounterStrike 2, which was released in 2024. Since esport titles tend to be more dependent on CPU performance and are also played in low to medium settings, I expect some improvements here. In 720p low settings, we see an improvement of 6% in average FPS and 4% in 1% lows. These don't sound like big gains, but every FPS counts in these titles. In 1080p medium settings, we can see the exact same improvement, and in 1440p, the game becomes more GPU bound, hence the improvements are reduced to 3% in average FPS and 4% in 1% low FPS. Next up is Rainbow Six Extraction. A title released in 2023 recommends 16GB as its recommended size of memory, and the game pushes the RAM usage to around 16 gigs on the new kit. In this title, we see one of the biggest gains. In 720p ultra low preset, we see a massive 13% gain, that is 35 more FPS to kill your opponents efficiently, and get this 15% improvement to the 1% low FPS. In 1080p medium preset, the trend continues with the gain of 11% in average FPS and 12% in 1% low FPS. However, as expected, in 1440p ultra preset, the average FPS is pretty much the same, but 1% lows still see an improvement of 8%. Our last esports title in the lineup is Fortnite, which receives constant updates. Even though Epic recommends 16 gigs of memory, if the system has more memory, then the games will push the memory usage above 16 gigs to about 18.5 gigs. But the big question is, does it improve performance? Well, the 1% lows are really bad in this game due to loading of map sections, and there's virtually no difference whether you have 16 gigs or 32 gigs of RAM. Having said that, we do see a big improvement in the average FPS. In 720p low settings, this improvement was a whopping 24%, and at 1080p medium it was 21%. Usually we don't see such improvements by just upgrading the RAM. At 1440p epic settings, the game becomes heavily GPU bound, but still manages to push 12% extra frames on an average. Now we come to a couple of racing games, the first one being a somewhat older title released in 2019, Assetto Corsa Competizione. For a 2019 game, it had high RAM requirements of 16 gigs for recommended settings, and the game pushed total RAM usage to around 15 gigs. So let's see what the performance improvement with the new RAM kit was. Well, absolutely none. Actually, there is a decline in performance in the 1% lows, which dipped by 1%, indicating yet another game that is affected by dual rank configuration, for which the improved cache latency wasn't able to make up for it. The next racing title is a slightly newer game, but still 4 years old, Forza Horizon 4. The game only recommends 12 gigs of memory, although the total system memory usage went well beyond 12 gigs to around 13.5 gigs on a 32 GB kit. But like previous racing game, will this also show no improvement? Well, Forza engine is a bit more optimized and it receives the new memory kit well. In 720p low preset, it gains about 5% more average FPS and 7% more in 1% low FPS. Even at 1080p medium settings, we see a similar gain in average FPS and a better 10% gain in 1% low FPS. Since this is an old title, at 1440p Ultra preset also the game is not fully GPU bound. Hence we still see the same 5% gain in average FPS and 8.5% gain in 1% low FPS. The last title on the lineup today is a simulation title, Train Simulator Classic. Although this game was released in 2015, it received several updates until as late as 2024. The game requirements do suggest 16 GB as recommended memory size, but in my testing the memory usage never went beyond 12 gigs. This game is notorious for having an unoptimized game engine, and no matter what system you throw at it, it will perform badly. And it was also the case here. We see one of the biggest drops in performance with the new memory kit, with the dual rank modules highlighting the overhead once again. In 720p lowest preset, the average FPS dropped by almost 6% and 1% lows dropped by 5%. As the game became more GPU bound, the decrease in performance became minimal. All in all, a very different result as compared to the other games in today's lineup. Now let's have a look at the overall performance improvement in all the games at 720p low settings. To summarize, all games showed impressive improvements in average FPS. Who would have thought that with a system like this, so much performance is left on the table with the slower RAM, and Fortnite being the highlight here, scoring the biggest gains. The performance gains continue at 1080p medium settings, with at least 11 of the titles showing improvements anywhere from 5% to 21%. At 1440p Ultra settings, we saw that when the games became more GPU dependent, the gains reduced, with only 5 titles showing gains greater than 4%. At these settings, it also became clear that the performance in 5 titles reduced slightly, hinting an overhead of running dual rank memory on the CPU controller. Let's now have a look at the overall performance improvement in 1% low FPS. The higher this improvement, the smoother the game becomes. At 720p, 15 of the 17 titles benchmarked today showed improvements, with the highlight being GTA 5, where we saw a whopping 39% improvement, with 6 titles showing an improvement of 10% or more. At 1080p, the improvements in 1% low FPS was literally off the charts for GTA 5, with Fortnite following up in close second place with 128% improvement, even though the 1% lows in Fortnite are surprisingly dismal. Moving on to other titles, we see that 7 out of the 17 titles saw an improvement of 10% or more in their 1% low FPS. At 1440p Ultra settings, when the games became more GPU bound, there were still improvements to be had, with over 8 titles showing more than 5% improvement in their 1% low FPS. However, there were also exceptions like Hitman 3, where the performance of the game was severely hit with the dual rank configuration, resulting in a decrease of 12% in 1% low FPS. Final thoughts based on what we have seen today. If you are GPU bound today, meaning you have a medium to low end GPU but a capable CPU, then you might get less improvement or even worse performance by going for a kit like this, as can be seen in 1440p test results. In this case, you are better off investing in a better GPU. On the other hand, if you already have a capable GPU and your CPU is holding you back, then it might be interesting for you to go for a faster and a bigger memory, as the performance gains will be similar to what we have seen in 720 and 1080p. A memory upgrade is probably the simplest upgrade you can do, and the prices of memory are currently affordable, but rumor has it that these prices will go up in future, especially if you are on DDR4 memory, as companies focus on producing more DDR5 memory kits. I hope I have provided enough insights on the performance improvement that can be had for a mid-range PC like this by upgrading the RAM from CL18 16GB to a faster CL16 32GB kit. Now, these benchmarks definitely took a lot of time to compile, so if you like this content, please leave me a comment below or like this video. I have another exciting video coming up where I will upgrade the CPU to one of the X3D CPUs and revisit all these games to see how big the improvements will be. If you would like to be informed of when that content is published, consider subscribing and joining me in that journey. And for your viewing pleasure, you can continue watching this video for all the benchmarks run today for the games in 3 different settings, or end the video. In either case, I would like to wish you all the best and hopefully see you in the next one. Peace out.
scholars on their way to broaden their minds. Nice golden mead.
It was an accident! Get away from me! Let us keep our distance!
sick drinking that shine Earl brought up. Ain't the first time.
Well, what can you do?
I think I had enough.
General Spawn.
Had to shoot at some kids picking through the woodpile. No respect.
I think I had enough.
That's the way it goes.
Well,
So you getting along okay?
Come here, I need your help. Come here, I need your help.
Indeed I am, or I'll have nothing to smell.
Henry, I'm glad you came.
Could do with a bite to eat. I feel quite hungry. Come here, I need your help.
Indeed I am, or I'll have nothing to
Good day, Henry.
I could do with a bite to eat. I'll have to get something to eat. I'm starting to get hungry.
Henry, I'm glad you stopped by.
Come here, I need your help.
Good day, Henry.
Here to buy, here to buy.
Indeed I am, or I'll have nothing to smell.
Welcome, Henry.
I feel quite hungry.
Help a poor fellow out.
Monstrosity.
Washed your hands, eh, freak? Well, another freak. Another drifter in from Temeria.
Double shades.
First they killed my son, now they'll throw us out into the street.
Show me your sword. Everyone's always on me.
I wouldn't give for a small
My,
jar.
what a
of
freak.
flowers.
Letting such miscreants in the city. By the prophet's weapons. A witcher.
Ooh. My, what a freak.
Youth these days, harebrained.
Her lad deals fist tech.
I cannot imagine the city under midst.
So I'm afraid to see the surgeon.
Simpleton!
Nothing hurts as much as
Come closer. Don't be shy. You'll find I've everything you ever need.
A hired killer.
And whosoever contributes coin to the cause, his sin shall be forgiven.
Unwavering faith.
inhabitants of Competizione, a reminder that you will be in effect, it is strongly urged that you respect the established by your government. tonight. It is strongly urged that you respect these measures established by your government.
¡Ey! ¡Ey! ¡Cuidado, niños! ¡Niños! ¡Ey! ¡Cuidado, niños! ¡Hey! ¡Cuidado, niños!